And my background has been in capital markets. So I have been the head of capital markets for over a decade. Have recently, in the last few months, picked up a new role as the head of sustainable finance for New Zealand for ANZ. And so while that's a new role, it's not something new for the bank itself. We have had a strong focus on sustainability. Indeed, I think one of the things when I think about our organisation is, our purpose is stated as to shape a world where people and communities thrive, and I think that aligns perfectly with the role of sustainable financing and connecting with indeed social impact and environmental impact as well. So I became aware of the developments in impact investing, as I'd call it, probably 5 to 7 years ago, and the government ran a pilot looking at this as a mechanism to deliver social impact in New Zealand, and they're looking at projects to finance and really, I suppose, looking at global practices in this area and introducing it to New Zealand. And so that was perhaps my first introduction, and I was taken with just that the impressive work that many NGOs were doing out in New Zealand in terms of engaging with our communities and delivering some great results, and saw that there was the opportunity to bring financing behind that and potentially drive some real scale and innovation. So that was really how I got particularly interested in this area. And since then, there's been an increased momentum. We've seen in New Zealand the development of green financing and sustainable financing over the last 5 or so years, as it slowly has evolved. And certainly, I've been keen to support the development of that market as well. So, look, very briefly, that's the angle I've come from. Look, I think it's fair to say that we're all on a learning curve, and I think it's exciting to be involved in in this area at this time. The organisation, as an organisation, I talked about our purpose just before, and aligned to that is indeed our objectives in terms of what we see as our role in terms of sustainability and sustainable financing, and certainly we bank a large number of New Zealand businesses and individuals. So we see ourselves as having a very important role in terms of facilitating the objectives of in terms of environmental financing, then obviously linked to the Paris Accord. The overall, in New Zealand, we're fortunate to have the Living Standards Framework, which outlines and aligns well with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So, in terms of, as an organisation, we want to be able to assist and help in terms of meet those objectives. It is a transition, and I think that's often missed. But when you look at where we are today and where we want to get to, then both for our organisation, but also for as a nation, change is needed, and it takes time to transition to that outcome. So I think, in a broader sense, we want to think about how we can play a role in assisting and helping mobilise that change. To that end, we've just recently updated a pledge to finance 50 billion of sustainable financing. Each year we review that, and that started off being a pledge of 20 billion. We've surpassed that, and so certainly the role we're playing, I think, is an important one. There's more that we want to do and that we need to do, so certainly that's where the role that I've just picked up as a new one for New Zealand, and highlights just the emphasis that we're placing on perhaps what I would say is a new way of doing business, and by that I mean that across all of finance, if we're thinking about what does sustainable financing mean, it really means taking in the broader lens of who our stakeholders are and ensuring that we are meeting expectations of that wider stakeholder group. And so that means, for example, certainly the staff, the community, the clients that we deal with, they are our stakeholders equally with those who provide us capital being our equity holders. So I think that is the shift we're seeing across business generally over the last short number of years, and I think that's going to be well and truly embedded in the way that businesses need to operate going forward.
Kind of a three-part question coming your way, Dean. So the first one is, in terms of sustainable finance, am I correct in understanding that it is more than just green financing, that it might be looking at social and governance factors within organizations as well in terms of the investment priorities? That's one. And second, considering that you have taken on the role quite recently, what has the work in the area of impact investment been in the since you took on the role, and how is this likely to evolve in the coming months?
Yeah, great questions, and certainly ESG, as it gets called, environmental social governance. Look, I see that as very much linked to the area of sustainability. I've been fortunate to be included in some of the working groups for the New Zealand Sustainable Finance Forum, and we spend quite a bit of time looking at the future of finance will look like, and the roadmap to moving in that direction. So it's quite a complex piece of work, and I think certainly it's fair to say that I think every organisation that we look at and talk to has work to do. So the first question is, where are we at today, and where do we need to get to? One of the big questions around that is being able to measure and capture performance against targets we have, and so that's becoming a key part of reporting. And so various companies, ANZ included, do produce sustainability reports. Those reports are evolving as we go, as there's more data collected. But it's very clear when we go out and engage with investors that they are very much focused on how companies are performing and what their plans are for the future around the areas of ESG. And so probably one of the key things coming out of this COVID-19 situation we have now is that, whereas I think a lot of the focus was on the E, being the environmental aspects pre-COVID, if you like, the social side of how businesses are engaging is picking up more and more of a theme, and that is around just the needs of individuals, the job losses we're seeing, the difficulties that will place on our economy and on our communities. So we don't lose sight of the importance of environmental targets, but we do naturally have to sit back and be very conscious of the challenges and the difficulties that many in our communities are facing. And so, to answer your question, absolutely, it is broader than just environmental, although environmental is very important. It does take into account, as we talked about, social, and governance is clearly very, very important, because strong governance is going to dictate the effectiveness with which we can address environmental and social challenges. To what extent has impact featured since I picked up the role? Look, it's been, unfortunately, I came into the role right before we went into lockdown, so And in some ways that's been a challenge, but it's been a great opportunity to engage with a lot of people. One of the things I'm trying to do is understand the ecosystem, as I think you referred to it when we were talking about this series. So firstly, I think it's a great thing you're doing in terms of putting this together. I'm connecting with more and more people, and I've been very, very impressed with, I suppose, the knowledge that's out there in New Zealand, the ideas that are there, reasons to be optimistic about what we can achieve in terms of impact. What probably the thing that strikes me is, the big question is, how can we actually develop a market which on a scale for New Zealand and solve some of these large issues, and that is a big question, but it's one that I'm quite passionate about, and really is to get people to come together and work together. So as a starting point, that's what I do, is just probably lift my level of understanding and just be aware of some of the ideas that are out there and what people are doing. And one of the things that struck me is the various views on what a social enterprise is. My thinking on that is that I see in the future being that businesses will need to be purpose-driven. They'll need to be able to show that they have a social impact and responsibility to the community, to retain that social license. So I think this is an evolving space, but the days of to purely be profit-driven, I think, are gone. Certainly, one of the opportunities for New Zealand, but probably in most countries, is to embrace some of these smaller businesses that have been set up with a social purpose, and provide financing to support them to grow and advance. And so there's some unique challenges there, and one of them is simply access to capital. And that's where, when I talked before about the need to be able to develop a market, I think that's quite important, because I think the challenge for any one organisation is too large. And so by coming together and bringing pools of capital to get together, we then have the best opportunity to be able to help these businesses establish and to grow, and to deliver on some of the great work they're doing as well.
I'm going to come back to that statement about accessibility to capital in a short while. But first, I wanted to ask you a little bit about how you feel the evolving COVID-19 situation and its economic fallout will impact the work you do, for the better or worse. Do you think the recovery from the pandemic is going to make sustainable finance and sustainable goals more of a focus for organizations, or less?
It's a really good question, and one that I've been discussing over the last number of weeks. I think there's two parts to that question. In the very short term, it's true that I think we've all been distracted from this event, and each sector of the economy has been impacted differently, and every company's got its own unique challenges. So the initial response is being, we need to deal with addressing the situation we're faced with, making sure our staff are safe, that we can manage the best we can during this initial period. So that probably has created some distraction. I am pleased to say that I don't get the feeling from the projects that we were working on that they've been shut down at all. I think they've been perhaps delayed as a result. And I do have some concern that possibly there's been the distraction may mean that the focus shifts elsewhere. The big question is one from a government point of view. There's clearly going to be a large fiscal impulse to try and kickstart the economy. The hope that I have is that we don't lose sight of the living standards framework that the government put in place. That we continue to hear the importance of the well-being aspects to that investment and spend. So clearly, the recovery is going to require support from the government. We're seeing that already. What I hope is that both private and public sector participants keep in mind the sustainability objectives that we have in those key decisions that are going to be made, because they're decisions that are going to impact us for the long term. So the importance of getting this right is particularly important, and we're seeing that being echoed by a number of organisations. I mentioned the Sustainable Finance Forum, so they've published a letter highlighting the importance of this as well. One of the other think tanks, the Lever Room, came out highlighting this point as well. So I think everyone's aware of the importance of getting this right. It is a great opportunity to reset in a truly sustainable manner. I do have some concerns on this matter, but I'm hopeful that we will retain the focus and the momentum that was there pre-COVID.
What should New Zealand-based social enterprises and small businesses that operate with a social purpose be doing in order to enable more impact investment or to work better with ANZ?
That's a great question, and when I sit down and look at opportunities that come along, there's often a really strong clear impact in terms of what's been delivered. So I've been really impressed and pleased with what I've seen out there. Often the challenge is one of scale. Why that's a challenge is just the fact that if you're trying to get investment or capital into a particular project or opportunity, the amount of work required to actually understand the business and the opportunity is the same regardless of whether you're talking about a relatively small investment or a very large one. And the ongoing involvement of capital providers is equally quite high. So we do have a challenge of scale. I think that can be potentially overcome, and there's work being done for various ideas on how we could scale this up. I think the data collection and presentation is important. So being able to sort of provide evidence of the impact that has been achieved to date, and I suppose some clarity around what the ask is and how that's going to be managed from a governance point of view are some of the other things that get quite a bit of attention. So in many ways, I think a lot of these organisations are doing the right things already. I think that probably the answer really isn't so much what they need to do, but what we need to do as a marketplace. And by that I mean just being able to provide a efficient way for capital to be raised for these organisations. So that challenge sits probably with people like me and others out there to be able to drive that forward. Why that's so challenging is that I think there's big pools of money out there. They have operated in a manner traditionally that is quite separate. They're very much mandate driven, and those mandates haven't really weren't created when we were looking at this whole issue of impact and driving impact. And so a lot of the traditional mandates are either commercial mandates which look at return focused or risk and return focused, or they are philanthropic in nature in terms of they're grant based. What I would hope to see is a hybrid market develop which sort of brings both of those things together, and so that is the challenge set before us at the moment. And I think if we can achieve that, I think that would make it a lot clearer for these businesses, what is required to be able to raise capital for them to grow.
I love the fact that you're talking about changing the narrative out there in terms of the markets, Dean. One of the things that we have seen our social enterprises and small businesses struggle with, especially when they're in the process of trying to access capital, is how do they start measuring and capturing the social impact of their performance against other metrics. From your experience, how would you say social enterprises should go about it? How should they measure, ideally, their social impact so that they're able to communicate that better to the larger market?
One of the key things for something to be investable is being able to see a track record from the organisation itself over an economic cycle, over a period of time. The resilience around the delivery of that impact can be measured. So one of the great ways of doing that is to actually have a pilot, so that you can actually test it on a smaller scale, see the results, and then that provides the evidence to be able to scale it up. Now that's not always possible, but I think having a line of sight around being able to work out what is the impact that you're focused on, and being able to be clear on capturing the measurement is quite important, because in the absence of that, it is going to be particularly hard, I believe, to get impact investors to support on a from an investment point of view on that basis. So I think that there's a willingness to perhaps give up some financial return to drive impact. But I guess the key point there being is that the impact aspect needs to be able to be captured and reported upon. So I'm not sure if I've answered the question very clearly, but I think that being clear on what your purpose, what your impact is a key, and then trying to work out how you're going to measure that and report it is equally important. And so I think those aspects are where I'd focus. I think there's others who are perhaps better able to guide on how to do that, because it is quite a skill and one that I don't have a lot of personal experience on. But certainly the work that I've seen the likes of Akina do in this space is very valuable, and certainly they've got the experience to be able to provide guidance in terms of how to do that. But I think it's a very good question and a very important one, because the risk is otherwise you get to a stage where you're wanting to get financing, and the investors who come along will actually want to see a track record on evidence of a track record.
Does ANZ have any framework that it shares with organizations in terms of how they could identify or measure environmental or social or governance objectives and goals?
So where we've focused, particularly on the environmental side, is looking at a global best practice and global frameworks. And so there it's been the Green Bond Principles, which has been driven by the International Capital Markets Association. And so they put out overriding sort of framework that's been accepted as being an international framework. So what we have endeavoured to do is to link ourselves up to a framework like that for the environmental aspects, and then adopt principles that are seen as being best practice. And so, for example, if we were to do a financing, there is typically a framework for the entity that's involved. There will be an assurance approach done, or an auditing approach done, in terms of adherence to that framework, and regular reporting on the back of that. So, look, I like that approach in the sense that I think it's important that there are frameworks that are internationally recognised, and where that is the case, then being able to tie to those is important, and I think that helps in terms of comparability and transparency around the outcomes have been delivered. There are also frameworks on the social side, and certainly the Sustainable Development Goals are seen as part of that framework as well. So that tends to be how we would approach it, is trying to look at those international frameworks and see how they map to what the entity is trying to achieve.
What are your thoughts and suggestions for achieving a new normal where all businesses measure social impact as part of their business functions just as much as they measure profit and revenue? Please feel free to